Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. First Nations children and their families, shortchanged by a woefully underfunded on-reserve child welfare system, are one step closer to receiving compensation. A federal court has approved the distribution plan for the $23 billion final settlement agreement. This builds upon a previous court decision last fall that approved the settlement amount. Under the agreement, each child and family member who qualifies is entitled to a minimum of $40,000. According to a statement by the Assembly of First Nations, application forms should be ready before the end of 2024. The Prime Minister has also committed to giving a public apology. No date for that has been set. The Ontario government has signed an agreement with 4 Northern First Nations. Each one will have their roads renewed, and nearby highways 11 and 584 will also be repaved in the municipality of Greenstone. It's about 300 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay. The road rehabilitation is part of a plan to eventually build an infrastructure corridor to a mineral-rich area known as the Ring of Fire. At a news conference earlier in the week, Ganoogaming First Nation Chief Sherry Taylor signed on to the agreement, but says her First Nation has mixed feelings about the deal.
From the outset, I wanted to be clear that Ganoogaming First Nation is standing here under duress and that we have issued a media release to that effect. As a First Nation who currently sits in a state of emergency, it does not feel naturally good for me to feel completely happy today. There is still so much my community and my community members are suffering from that hasn't been addressed, even though we have asked our treaty partners, the federal and provincial governments, for help.
To Manitoba now, where today the government unveiled more details about the 5-stage plan to search the Prairie Green landfill for the remains of Mercedes Myron and Morgan Harris. Premier Wab Kinew, along with project lead Amna Mackin, told reporters the team has entered Stage 2, which involves preparing the site, building some temporary structures, and a pilot test program. Stage 1, the initial planning stage, wrapped up in the spring, and the official excavation stage in Stage 3 is set to begin this fall. Stage 4 involves searching a targeted zone, and Stage 5 will assess the needs for additional searches if required. The site will also include a healing space for family and elders. Premier Kinew described the search as a compassionate mission.
It's not about delivering evidence and, other pieces of information that can be argued in court. This is about bringing loved ones home. This is about returning with respect and dignity to women that 2 Manitoba families have lost.
The federal government has made good on a 2019 campaign promise to remove perceived threats posed by open net salmon farms against the wild salmon populations off the coast of BC. However, the announcement was not exactly well received by everyone. APTN's Tina House has this story from Vancouver.
Any questions on the floor at this time?
At this press conference, Federal Minister Jonathan Wilkinson announced the end of open net fish farms in BC.
The open net farms will be fully terminated in terms of operations within 5 years.
And in that 5-year timeline, 63 BC salmon fish farm license holders will be expected to move entirely to land-based operations. However, that plan is not feasible, says Brian Kingsit, Executive Director of BC Salmon Farmers.
Right now, land-based salmon culture is 0.07% of farm salmon around the world. And even though none of those systems have actually managed to come to scale with anything. The biggest one, which has had more than $1 billion poured into it, has now lost 98% of its value. So asking investors to move to this with no support, which would be massive, is simply impossible in the rural areas that the First Nations and the companies work in.
Kingsit says that a lot of the salmon farming operations are located in remote First Nations territories where they are not on the power grid, and it's not an ideal condition for a full transition. With over 500 Indigenous people directly employed in remote communities from the industry, a separate press conference was held across the street from those stakeholders.
5 years to transition to land-based or closed containment in my territory is the same as shutting our operations down. We do not have the land or the supporting power infrastructure to do this.
Chief Bob Chamberlain says there are 120 First Nations in BC who support the government's plan to shut down these farms because they strongly believe that fish farming is bad for the wild salmon stock.
When the Wild Salmon Alliance began to inform First Nations of the rationale for being supportive of the removal, it's based upon fact. Being able to draw First Nations that have Aboriginal rights to fish that are dying at fish farms from sea lice and disease and pathogen and bacteria, it's a step forward in reconciliation.
However, these chiefs say with a lack of consultation, the decision to remove the farms will have a dire impact on their remote communities. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
A new report by the University of Manitoba says that subarctic killer whales from the Atlantic Ocean are moving into the eastern Canadian Arctic. Researchers for the report say this could negatively affect Arctic killer whales native to the region. The two killer whale populations are genetically different, the report says, and climate change is partly to blame for the migration. The report states the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average, causing a longer ice-free season that invites species from the south. It warns the migrating killer whales, which are at the top of the food chain, can cause significant effects to the surrounding ecosystem by consuming the already limited food supply of other Arctic marine mammals. The findings will help prioritize conservation and management efforts for the killer whale populations, as well as other marine mammals important to the area's Indigenous communities. Almost 850,000 hectares of Yukon's northeast coast is now protected thanks to a new conservation agreement. A handful of unveiled organizations signed the agreement with the federal and Yukon governments in Aklavik Wednesday. 1.8% of the Yukon's landmass is covered by the agreement. The porcupine, caribou herd, polar bears, and migratory birds in the Ulavit, Angu, Niakavuk conservation area will be protected. The Nunavut in the Northwest Territories have ancestral ties to the area and have depended on it for thousands of years. The agreement will help preserve their right to use the land.
And we're proud today to be able to be here and to sign and assure that this area remains pristine and for the use of our community.
Time for a quick break. Still to come, our Truth in Politics panel will be here to discuss the lawsuit filed against the AFN by ousted former National Chief Roseanne Archibald. Stick around. Welcome back. From the late 1930s to the mid-60s, thousands of children in Quebec were forcibly moved from orphanages to psychiatric hospitals. The vast majority had no mental illness, and some weren't even orphans. Tomorrow night on the season finale of APTN Investigates, video journalist Tom Fenario looks into Quebec's great darkness and meets with Indigenous orphans still seeking justice today.
Named after former Quebec Premier Maurice Duplessis, the term Duplessis orphan refers to children who in the late 1930s to mid-60s were moved from orphanages to psychiatric hospitals. But the vast majority had no mental illness. And many weren't even orphans in the true sense of the word.
Ma mère a tombé malade et le curé du village avec le médecin, il a venu voir mon père. Puis il a dit à mon père, il dit, les deux petites filles vont être belles avec les sœurs, ils vont se faire instruire. Puis là, le prêtre, puis le médecin nous a rentré dans son char. Elle nous a poussés dans un char qu'on peut embarquer, puis moi, je ne voulais pas embarquer, puis ils m'ont forcé d'embarquer, puis je pleurais tout le temps pour ma mère.
It was 1945, and in Quebec, the Catholic Church controlled education and social services. Their power in the province at the time is hard to overstate. In the early 1950s, Duplessis realized that federal subsidies paid $2.25 a day for mental patients versus 70 cents a day for orphans. He shortly thereafter collaborated with the church to wrongly classify thousands of orphans, in the terms of the day, as mentally retarded. This decades-long collusion between church and state in Quebec is known as La Grande Noirceur, the Great Darkness.
Quebec will have to reckon with the way that their dead are being treated here. Certainly in our communities we have missing children. We've known about that because our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents told these stories to us.
There's a great concern and worry that human remains will be desecrated and potentially destroyed.
Important story there from Tom. You can catch the season finale of APTN Investigates Orphans of Church and State tomorrow night, immediately following the APTN National News. The first woman to hold the role of National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations is suing the organization. As we reported earlier this week, ousted National Chief Roseanne Archibald alleges damages for defamation of character, breach of trust, breach of fiduciary duty, and negligence. None of those have been proven in court or tested. Archibald is seeking $5 million in damages. For more on this, our Truth in Politics panel is here. Jennifer Leywitz is a policy analyst, and Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Negon, great to have you with us. Jennifer, we'll start with you and your thoughts on this lawsuit being filed by former National Chief Roseanne Archibald.
Well, I had a chance to read the article on APTN, and it sounds like there's a number of issues that she's looking into, one of them being defamation. And, you know, being ousted after trying to fulfill her mandate. You know, she did run on the concept of trying to bring a financial audit to the AFN. So I'll be interested to see where this heads. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of questions surrounding why she was ousted and what the current status of that audit is. Because, you know, just because she's gone, does that mean that the AFN isn't still going to look into the financial transparency that so many grassroots First Nations people were asking for?
Right. Negon, you tweeted out that this lawsuit was predictable but avoidable. Want to elaborate on that?
The fact is that you easily could have let her finish her run as national chief. You either believe in democracy or you don't. And the fact is that this has shown not just that the AFN isn't really interested in democracy and the fact that the chiefs chose Roseanne Archibald, like her, hate her, disagree with her or not, she should run out her run. She should finish her term as national chief. They can say things like workplace harassment. They can say things like that she wasn't acting appropriately. I mean, the fact is that if the United States can survive Donald Trump, the AFN could survive who's ever in charge. But the fact is, I don't think that was the issue. The issue was consistently and continually the fact that she was asking for financial transparency. And yes, maybe at times she was rough around the edges and asking for that and calling for that. It shows evidence that there's a toxicity within the staff. There's also a real toxicity within the relationship between the regional chiefs and the national chief. And that's precisely what led this to what was a predictable outcome, which will be this will be in the courts. It will likely be an out-of-court settlement because the fact is the AFN isn't transparent, doesn't respond to media requests, and then even the national chief now won't talk about, or any of the other regional chiefs, because they won't even make at this point a statement of defense, because this is something that will be played out in the public, and the AFN doesn't have to report publicly because they're not a government, they're a lobby group.
You both touched on this, Jennifer. Do you think, though, that the forensic audit is still needed or will ever happen?
I definitely think it's still needed. I think especially, you know, when it comes to any type of funding that is flowing through any of these bodies, especially as Negon had said, it's a lobby group. Where is the money going? And if there's nothing to hide, well then what's the problem? I think by trying to double down and do everything within your legal powers to hide it is a problem. But not even legal powers, because they're not the ones that launched the lawsuit. But when you have a national chief that is running on financial transparency and bringing an audit to this national group, and then quickly she's ousted before her term is even up, that raises a lot of questions for First Nations members across the country on whether or not, number one, the AFN is effective, and number two, why are they trying so hard to get away from an audit?
The court proceedings here could bring out some interesting things, but like you say, Nigan, you think this will probably take place outside of the courts and settle. Do you think, though, that this is going to continue to haunt the AFN?
It's impossible for the AFN to continue to do its work, and impossible for now National Chief Cindy Woodhouse, who's been implicated in the lawsuit, to have any legitimacy with any supporters or those who are a very significant contingent of the AFN who were maybe not always agreeing with Roseanne Archibald, but certainly calling for a lot more transparency in the organization. Even since the beginning of Cindy Woodhouse's time as National Chief, this has just been a specter that continually is in the background. And if anything, this was a predictable outcome to have a lawsuit, but hopefully will bring some kind of closure to that issue. I think all of us who are invested as First Nations people want to see the AFN do its work, do its advocacy, not represent us, but to stand beside our First Nations and be able to get some of the really crucial issues done, whether it be lobster fishing rights in the East Coast, whether it be negotiation of treaties, or this tremendous issue involving climate change that our First Nations are dealing with, and the fact that there's a continual movement to open pipelines and to open resource development on First Nations territories. And if there is a change in federal government, I can promise you that this federal government, while friendly to Indigenous rights, the next federal government, if it is a conservative government, might have a very different tone, and we will need a strong advocacy body. So the AFN needs to get its ducks in a row now.
Well, we'll see. The AFN gathers again in just a few weeks. Niga and Jennifer, appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you.
Graduation season is in full swing. After the break, we'll bring you to a special ceremony held in Winnipeg. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And it was a night to remember for our former host, Melissa Ridgen. Family and friends gathered at the Assiniboine Downs in Winnipeg for Melissa's birthday. One of the horse races was dedicated in her name, the Melissa Beth First Half Century Celebration. I may have won a couple of dollars on that race. It was a fun night. Ridgie's Big 5-0 is on Saturday. Happy birthday, Melissa. Let's take a look now at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 27 for Halifax and Fredericton. 10 with showers in Kuujjuaq, 12 in Nain. 27 in Montreal and Val-d'Or. 23 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie, rain, and 26 in North Bay. Showers and 22 in Thunder Bay, 25 with rain for Sioux Lookout. 17 and showers in Churchill, sun's out, and 24 in God's Lake. 26 in Winnipeg, 25 in Dauphin. 23 with rain in Regina, 20 and showers in Saskatoon. 22 and rain in Meadow Lake, showers and 23 for La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 26 with the sun out in Fort McMurray, 29 in High Level. Showers and 24 for Edmonton, 22 with rain for Lethbridge. 23 in Vancouver, a sunny 29 for Kamloops. 27 in Fort Nelson, sun's out, and 26 in Prince George. 17 and sunny for Old Crow, showers and 20 in Whitehorse. 21 in Yellowknife, showers and 20 in Norman Wells. +1 with snow in Sax Harbor, a cloudy 5 above for Pawlatuck. 13 in Chesterfield, a sunny high of 12 in Whale Cove. +2 with snow in Resolute, 4 in Arctic Bay. Over 100 graduates walked the stage in Winnipeg from the Yellow Quill College today. Yellow Quill is governed by 6 First Nations and is also celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. And as TR Wheatley shows us now, this graduation hits different because they're seeing a rise in student enrollment thanks to some recent good news.
Vera Lal.
This class is made up of 117 graduates ranging from mature high school students to college diploma earners in business, finance management, addiction treatment, mental health, and child and family services.
It wasn't always easy to say what I felt.
Mature high school student Micah Cordell was chosen by his peers to be this year's valedictorian. He also scooped up the most awards for finishing up with a 99% average. He shared his life story, including why he quit school more than 16 years ago.
It was decided when I got there that I wouldn't accomplish anything. I would never end up anywhere. So I left school and I became tied up in gangs and selling drugs. It was a lot of healing. I struggled with depression and addictions for many years before finally coming to Sundance.
It's stories like this why Yellow Quill was created back in 1984 by 6 First Nations, says its director Doreen Beaucamp.
At that time, the Tribal Council didn't see a lot of progress of their students in mainstream schools.
While administrators are happy to see the high number of grads this year, they've been heavily preparing for the next school year. Earlier this week, the province wrote them a letter.
Approved to grant degrees.
Under Manitoba's university degree legislation, Yellow Quill is qualified to grant Bachelor of Arts degrees. The first 2 being delivered this fall are for teachers and social workers. Yellow Quill has accreditation with the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium. However, this added step will put the upcoming grads at par with the other 4 provincially run universities.
I think people will be more accepting of the college in terms of legalities and can we get grant degrees or not, and yes, we can now.
Excellence, Caitlin Schwan.
Caitlin Schwalm completed her First Nations Child and Family Services diploma. She will be taking the new degree program in the near future.
We want that. We want our First Nations people to come together and be able to have the same opportunity as everyone else, right? Because I feel like we're owed that much. And I think it's a really big door that's going to be open for a lot of future generations to come.
TR Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
What a big graduating class. Great news there for Yellow Quill as well. Congrats to all those grads. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. And stay with APTN all day tomorrow for National Indigenous Peoples Day. There's going to be great programming all day, as well as our reporters fanned out across the country. And we'll be doing live hits every hour on celebrations that are taking place in communities near you. Creason and I will also be back here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern for our coverage of National Indigenous Peoples Day. Should be fun. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your summer solstice. We'll see you back here tomorrow.